The call came in at 2:00 a.m. It was the one phone call the most feared man in New York never expected to receive. Dominic Barone was in the middle of $1 million negotiation when his elderly maid, Mrs. Higgins, screamed 4 words that stopped his heart. "Please come home. She's destroying her." Dominic thought he knew fear. He thought he knew violence. But when he kicked down the doors of his mansion 20 minutes later, what he found in the living room didn't just shock him. It changed the history of the Mafia forever. You think you know the victim? Think again. The air in the back room of the Gilded Cage, a high-end cigar lounge in downtown Manhattan, was thick enough to choke a normal man. But Dominic Barone was not a normal man. At 34, he was the capo dei capi, the boss of bosses, holding the leash of the 5 major families of the East Coast. He sat in a leather armchair that cost more than most people's cars, staring across the mahogany table at Marcus Thorne. Thorne was a slimy operator from Chicago, trying to push counterfeit pharmaceuticals into Dominic's territory. Dominic hated drugs. They were messy. They brought heat. "I'm telling you, Barone," Thorne said, flicking ash from his cigar onto the Persian rug, a deliberate sign of disrespect. "The margins are too good to ignore. You're letting millions slip through your fingers because of some misplaced sense of honor." Dominic didn't blink. His face was a mask of cold marble, his dark eyes unreadable. He adjusted the cuff of his bespoke Brioni suit. "My answer is no, Marcus. And if I see one of your trucks cross the Jersey line, I won't seize the cargo. I'll burn the drivers." The threat was delivered with a calm that was more terrifying than a scream. Thorne stiffened. The tension in the room spiked. Dominic's bodyguards, 2 hulking men named Luca and Silas, shifted their hands toward their suit jackets. Then a sound cut through the tension. Brr-ring. Brr-ring. It wasn't Dominic's business phone. It wasn't his personal cell. It was the red phone, an ancient, brick-like Nokia he kept in his inside pocket. Only 3 people had that number: his lawyer, his underboss, and Mrs. Higgins, the 70-year-old maid who had practically raised him and now took care of his estate in the Hamptons. The room went silent. Thorne raised an eyebrow. "You gonna take that, boss?" Dominic held up a hand, silencing him. He pulled the phone out. His heart did a strange, stuttering flip. Mrs. Higgins knew never to call this number unless the house was burning down. He answered. "Higgins, Master Dominic." The voice on the other end was a shriek, distorted by sobbing. "Oh God, please, you have to come home now." Dominic stood up so abruptly, his heavy chair fell backward with a crash. Thorne jumped, reaching for his own weapon, but Dominic didn't even look at him. "Higgins, breathe." "What is it?" "It's Vanessa." Mrs. Higgins screamed. "She's here," she broke in. "She found Elara." "Oh, sweet Jesus." "The blood?" "Master Dominic, please, she's destroying her. She's going to kill her." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Vanessa DeLuca, Dominic's ex-fiancée, the daughter of the rival DeLuca crime family. She was a viper in human skin, a woman who knew how to use a knife as well as she used her seduction. Dominic had broken off their engagement 6 months ago to marry Elara Vance, a quiet, shy librarian whose father had owed Dominic a life debt. Elara was innocent. She was soft. She liked baking bread and reading poetry. She didn't know how to hold a gun. If Vanessa was there, if Vanessa had cornered Elara. "I'm coming!" Dominic growled, his voice dropping to a register that sounded like grinding tectonic plates. Lock yourself in the pantry. Do not come out." He hung up. He looked at Thorne. "Meeting over," Dominic said. "We aren't done here." Thorne stood up, trying to reclaim his authority. "You walk out on me, Barone and Chicago will take it as an act of war." Dominic didn't hesitate. He grabbed a heavy crystal ashtray from the table and smashed it across Thorne's face. Thorne crumpled to the floor, unconscious blood spurting from his nose. "Lucas Silas," Dominic barked as he strode toward the door. "Get the car. We're going to the Hamptons. If we don't make it in 40 minutes, everyone dies." The black armored SUV tore down the Long Island Expressway at 130 miles per hour. The rain had started to fall, heavy sheets of water that hammered against the bulletproof glass, blurring the lights of the passing cars into streaks of red and white. Dominic sat in the back, gripping his phone so hard the screen cracked under his thumb. He tried the house landline. Dead. He tried Elara's cell. Straight to voicemail. Elara. He closed his eyes and saw her face. She was 23 with big doe eyes and a spirit so gentle it made his chest ache. When he first married her, it was just business clearing her father's debt. But over the last 6 months, she had become the only light in his dark, violent world. She didn't care about his money. She cared if he had eaten dinner. She cared if he was sleeping. Vanessa DeLuca had hated that. Vanessa had sworn revenge the day Dominic married the little librarian mouse. Vanessa had told him, "I will tear her apart, Dom. I will make you watch." "Faster," Dominic ordered, his voice tight. "Boss, we're doing $140, Silas said from the driver's seat, his knuckles white on the wheel. "The roads are slick." "I said faster," Dominic roared, pulling a Beretta 9mm from his holster and checking the chamber. "If she touches a hair on Elara's head, I will burn the DeLuca family to the ground. I will leave nothing but ash." The car hydroplaned, slightly correcting itself with a jerk, but Silas pushed the pedal to the floor. Dominic's mind raced through the scenarios. Mrs. Higgins had said, "She's destroying her." He imagined Vanessa tall, statuesque, and trained in Krav Maga, cornering Elara in the kitchen. He imagined Elara crying, begging, curled up in a ball, while Vanessa unleashed her fury. Elara was fragile. She bruised like a peach. She wouldn't fight back. She couldn't. The guilt washed over him like acid. He had left them unguarded. He had assumed the estate security was enough. He had underestimated Vanessa's insanity. "We're here," Lucas shouted from the passenger seat. The iron gates of the Blackwood estate loomed ahead. They were open. That was the first bad sign. The guard booth was dark. The SUV screeched up the long gravel driveway, kicking up mud and stones. The massive front door of the mansion was slightly ajar. One of the windows on the ground floor was shattered, jagged glass catching the headlights. Dominic didn't wait for the car to stop completely. He kicked the door open and rolled out onto the wet gravel, his suit instantly soaked. He raised his gun, moving with the lethal grace of a predator. "Secure the perimeter," he shouted to his men. "I'm going in." He ran up the steps, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He expected to hear screaming. He expected to hear Vanessa's cruel laughter. But the house was silent, a deadly heavy silence that smelled of iron and copper. Dominic burst through the front door, sweeping the gun left and right. "Elara Higgins!" The foyer was a wreck. A Ming vase lay in shards on the marble floor. A heavy side table was overturned, and there were drag marks, smears of red blood on the pristine white tiles leading toward the great hall. "No," Dominic whispered. The fear that gripped him was colder than any winter. No, no, no. He followed the trail of blood. It led through the double doors of the great hall. The doors were closed. Dominic stood before them, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He prepared himself for the worst sight of his life. He prepared himself to see his wife broken, or worse. He steeled himself to become a monster to avenge her. He kicked the double doors open. "Get away from her!" Dominic roared, aiming his weapon at the center of the room. But his finger froze on the trigger. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He stood there, the rain dripping from his hair, staring at the scene before him. His brain couldn't process the visual data. It was the opposite of everything he had expected. It was a tableau so shocking that for a moment, Dominic Barone, the boss of bosses, forgot how to breathe. The great hall was dimly lit by the chandelier, which was swinging slightly, casting swaying shadows across the room. In the center of the room, the expensive Persian rug was ruined, soaked in blood. But it wasn't Ilara's blood. Vanessa De Luca, the feared daughter of the mob, the woman who had trained with Mossad agents and cage fighters, was on her knees. Her face was swollen, unrecognizable. Her designer dress was shredded. She was gasping for air, clutching her ribs, one eye swollen shut, looking up in absolute terror. Standing over her was Ilara, his sweet, innocent librarian wife. Ilara was wearing a white silk nightgown that was splattered with red crimson specks. She was barefoot. In her right hand, she didn't hold a book. She held a heavy antique fire poker. But it wasn't the weapon that terrified Dominic. It was her face. Ilara wasn't crying. She wasn't shaking. Her expression was completely blank. Her eyes, usually so warm and soft, were dead shark's eyes, void of empathy, void of fear. She looked bored. Mrs. Higgins was in the corner, cowering behind a sofa, sobbing into her apron. "I told her to stop, I told her." Dominic lowered his gun slowly, his mind reeling. Ilara. Ilara turned her head slowly to look at him. She didn't look relieved to see him. She looked annoyed at the interruption. She dropped the heavy iron poker onto the floor with a loud clang. She reached up and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, her hand stained with Vanessa's blood. "You're late, Dominic," Ilara said. Her voice was steady, calm, chilling. "I had to handle the trash myself." Vanessa on the floor coughed, spitting blood. She looked at Dominic, her eyes pleading. "Dom, help me. She's a psycho. Get her away from me." Dominic looked from the broken Mafia princess on the floor to his small, delicate wife. "Higgins said she was destroying you." Dominic stammered, feeling like a child in a room of adults. "Higgins is dramatic," Ilara said, stepping over Vanessa's body as if it were a pile of laundry. She walked toward a side table, poured herself a glass of water, and took a sip. "She broke in. She had a knife. She intended to cut my face." Ilara set the glass down. "She made a miscalculation." "A miscalculation?" Dominic asked, his voice barely a whisper. "She assumed that because I read books, I don't know how to read bone structures," Ilara said. She walked back to Vanessa, crouched down and whispered something in Vanessa's ear. Vanessa whimpered and curled into a fetal position. Ilara stood up and looked Dominic dead in the eye. "My father didn't just owe you money, Dominic. Did you ever ask why he owed you money? Did you ever ask what he did before he was a drunk?" Dominic shook his head, mute. "He was a cleaner," Ilara said softly. for the CIA, specialized in interrogation and close-quarters combat. He taught me how to break a man's trachea before he taught me how to ride a bike. She gestured to Vanessa, who was now unconscious on the rug. I didn't want this life, Dom. I wanted to be a librarian. I wanted peace. But she brought war into my kitchen. Elara's eyes flashed with a sudden, dark fire. And I finish wars. Dominic realized then that he didn't know the woman standing in front of him. He had married a lamb and discovered she was a wolf who had been wearing wool just to keep warm. What do we do now? Dominic asked. It was the first time in his life he had asked someone else for orders. Elara looked at the blood on her hands, then back at him. A small, cold smile touched her lips. Now, she said, now we clean up. And then, husband, you're going to take me out to dinner. I'm starving. Killing works up an appetite. As she walked past him toward the bathroom to wash her hands, Dominic looked at his bodyguards, Luca and Silas, who were standing in the doorway, mouths agape. Boss, Luca whispered. Who the hell did you marry? Dominic looked at his wife's retreating back. I think, he said, a mix of terror and twisted pride rising in his chest. I married the only person in this city more dangerous than me. But the night wasn't over. Vanessa hadn't come alone, and the De Luca family would notice their daughter was missing. The war wasn't ending, it was just beginning, and Elara Vance was about to show the world that the librarian was actually the head mistress of pain. The rain had stopped, leaving the Hamptons estate, shrouded in a thick grey mist. Inside the library, the mood was suffocating. Dominic Barone sat behind his mahogany desk, a glass of scotch in his hand. He wasn't drinking it. He was just holding it, staring at the woman, sitting in the wingback chair opposite him. Elara had showered. She was wearing a soft, oversized cashmere sweater and leggings looking for all the world like the innocent girl he thought he'd married. She was sipping herbal tea. But across the room, tied to a heavy wooden chair with industrial zip ties, sat Vanessa De Luca. She was conscious now, her face a mask of purple bruises, one eye swollen shut. Luca and Silas stood by the door, their arms crossed, looking uncomfortable. They were used to violence, but they weren't used to this. She's not talking, boss, Luca grunted. We asked who gave her the gate codes. She just spits at us. Dominic sighed, setting his glass down. He stood up, ready to take over. Vanessa, you know how this works. You're in my house. You tried to kill my wife. If you don't give me a name, I hand you over to Silas. And Silas has no imagination, but he has a lot of patience. Vanessa laughed, a wet, gurgling sound. Go to hell, Dom. My father will burn this city to ash if I don't check in by morning. Your father is a relic, Dominic said, stepping closer. Give me the name. How did you bypass the perimeter sensors? I'm not telling you a damn thing, Vanessa spat. Dominic raised his hand to strike her, but a soft voice stopped him. Dominic, sit down. It wasn't a request. It was a command. Dominic turned. Elara placed her teacup on the saucer with a delicate clink. She stood up and walked over to Vanessa. She didn't look angry. She looked curious, like a scientist, examining a bug under a microscope. You're going about this all wrong, Elara said softly to her husband. Pain creates adrenaline. Adrenaline creates resistance. She expects you to hit her. She's prepared for it. Elara stopped inches from Vanessa's face. She didn't touch her. She just leaned in and whispered, Your nose is broken, Vanessa. I can see the deviation. If it heals like that, you'll have a permanent hook. And your orbital bone, I think I fractured it. You'll have a droop in your left eye for the rest of your life. Vanessa flinched. Vanity was the DeLuca princess's weakness. I can fix it. Elara lied, her voice smooth as silk. Or I can press my thumb right here. Elara hovered her finger over Vanessa's shattered cheekbone and turn the bone into powder. You'll never look in a mirror again without screaming. Vanessa's breathing hitched. You're a freak. I'm a pragmatist, Elara corrected. The code's Vanessa. Who sold them to you? Because we both know you aren't smart enough to hack a military-grade system. Vanessa trembled. The fear of ugliness was stronger than the fear of death for a woman raised to be a trophy. It was a broker, Vanessa whispered, tears leaking from her good eye. Digital only. Goes by the name Acheron. He contacted me. He said he had a back door into the Barone network. Dominic frowned. Acheron, I've never heard of him. I have, Elara said, straightening up. She looked at Dominic, her eyes dark. He's not a broker. He's a mercenary contractor. Former NSA. If Acheron is involved, this wasn't a break-in, Dominic. It was an assassination attempt, sanctioned by someone with deep pockets. My father paid him, Vanessa sobbed. Daddy wanted you dead. I just wanted her dead. I asked Acheron to lower the gate so I could get to the bitch. Elara turned to Luca. Take her to the basement. Clean her up. Put ice on her face. We need her alive for leverage. Yes, Mrs. Barone, Luca said instantly, snapping to attention. He didn't even look at Dominic for confirmation. The power dynamic in the room had shifted. The men knew who the Alpha was now. As they dragged Vanessa away, Dominic looked at Elara. How do you know who Acheron is? Elara walked back to her tea. I told you, Dom. My father taught me things. Acheron was on the blacklist 3 years ago. If he's in New York, we have a bigger problem than the DeLuca family. Oui? Dominic asked. Elara took a sip of tea, looking at him over the rim of the cup. Yes, oui. You married me, Dominic. You brought me into this house. I protected it. We are partners now, unless you want a divorce. Dominic looked at the woman who had just psychologically dismantled a Mafia princess in under 2 minutes. He felt a surge of adrenaline that had nothing to do with fear. No, Dominic said, a slow grin spreading across his face. No divorce. But we have a meeting with Giovanni DeLuca tomorrow. He's going to wonder where his daughter is. Good, Elara said, her eyes gleaming. I have nothing to wear. We need to go shopping. The Onyx Room was the kind of restaurant where the menus didn't have prices, and the waiters knew how to disappear when business was being discussed. It was neutral ground territory held by the Swiss banking families, a demilitarized zone for the New York mob. Giovanni DeLuca sat at the head of the long table, surrounded by 4 of his best lieutenants. Giovanni was 60, a bull of a man with silver hair and a temper that was legendary. He checked his gold Rolex for the 3rd time. He's late, Giovanni growled. Disrespectful. He'll be here, boss, one of his men said. Maybe he ran into traffic. Or maybe he's dead, Giovanni muttered. He hadn't heard from Vanessa in 24 hours. He assumed she had succeeded and was laying low, or that she had failed and was captured. Either way, tonight was about power. The double doors opened. The entire restaurant seemed to quiet down. Dominic walked in first, wearing a black tuxedo, looking every inch the king of New York. But no one was looking at Dominic. On his arm was Elara. Gone was the librarian. Gone were the cardigans and the messy bun. Elara was wearing a floor-length gown of emerald green silk that clung to her curves like a second skin. Her back was bare. Her hair was cascaded in polished waves over one shoulder. She wore diamonds at her throat that caught the dim light, but her eyes were sharper than the jewels. She walked with a predatory grace, chin-high hand resting lightly on Dominic's forearm. Giovanni narrowed his eyes. He had heard Dominic married a mouse. This woman was no mouse. "Giovanni," Dominic said, stopping at the table. He didn't offer a hand. "Sorry we're late. My wife took a while getting ready." "A woman who is worth the wait is never late," Giovanni said smoothly, though his eyes were cold. "Sit." They sat. The tension was thick enough to cut with a steak knife. "Where is she?" Giovanni asked, skipping the pleasantries. He stared directly at Dominic. "Where is who?" Dominic feigned ignorance, pouring himself a glass of water. "My daughter." Giovanni slammed his hand on the table. The silverware rattled. "Vanessa. She hasn't answered her phone since last night. If you touched her, Barone, the truce is over." "Your daughter," Elara spoke up. Her voice was clear, melodic, and carried effortlessly across the table. "Is currently resting in the guest wing of our estate. She had a nasty fall." Giovanni's head snapped toward Elara. "Excuse me. You are speaking to me." "I am," Elara said, locking eyes with the old Don. "Vanessa broke into my home last night. She attempted to murder me in my living room. Under the laws of our world, Giovanni I had every right to put a bullet in her head. Instead, I gave her an ice pack. You should be thanking me." The table went silent. Giovanni's lieutenants looked stunned. Wives did not speak at sit-downs, especially not to a Don. Giovanni's face turned purple. "You little... careful," Dominic warned, his hand moving to his jacket. "She's lying," Giovanni spat. "Vanessa is a trained fighter. You're a nobody, a bookworm." Elara smiled. It was the same cold smile she had worn the night before. She reached into her clutch purse. Giovanni's guards' tensed hands flying to their guns. Elara pulled out a phone. It was Vanessa's phone. She slid it across the table. "Play the recording," Elara said. Giovanni hesitated, then picked up the phone. He pressed play on the latest voice memo. Daddy, please, don't send anyone else. She's a demon. I told her about Acheron. I told her everything. Just let me come home." Vanessa's voice was broken, sobbing, terrified. Giovanni's hand shook. He looked at Elara with a new emotion. Fear. "You tortured my child," he whispered. "I disciplined an intruder," Elara corrected. "Now let's talk business. You hired Acheron to breach our security. That's an act of war. But I'm willing to offer a peace treaty." Dominic looked at his wife, surprised. They hadn't discussed a treaty. "What do you want?" Giovanni asked, his voice low. "I want the name of the insider," Elara said. "Acheron didn't hack the system alone. Someone on the inside gave him the keys. You know who it is. Give me the name and you get your daughter back. Alive. Mostly intact." Giovanni stared at her for a long time. He realized he had underestimated the Barone family. Dominic was the muscle. But this woman, she was the strategist. "I don't know the name," Giovanni admitted, leaning back, looking defeated. "Acheron deals in shadows. But the payment. The money for the hit didn't come from my personal accounts. It was routed through a shell company in the Cayman Islands. Blue Jay Holdings." Elara's eyes widened slightly. "Just a fraction." "Blue Jay," she repeated. "That's all I know," Giovanni said. "Now give me my daughter." "Tomorrow at noon," Elara said, standing up. "At the docks. Come alone." She turned and walked away, Dominic following her. Once they were outside in the cool night air, waiting for the valet, Dominic grabbed her arm gently. Blue Jay Holdings. Does that mean something to you? Elara looked up at him, and for the first time she looked worried. Blue Jay, she whispered. That was my father's code name in the CIA. Dominic felt a chill run down his spine. Your father is dead, Elara. He died of a heart attack 2 years ago. Did he? Elara stared into the dark street. Or did he just go underground, Dominic, if my father is alive, and he's working with Acheron? Then this isn't just a Mafia war. It's a family reunion. The drive back to the estate was silent. The revelation hung heavy in the air. Elara's father, Thomas Vance, was supposed to be a drunk ex-spy who died of liver failure. Dominic had paid for the funeral himself. He had seen the body. It's impossible, Dominic said, breaking the silence as the SUV pulled through the repaired gates. I saw him in the casket, Elara. You saw a shell, Elara said, staring out the window. There are drugs that mimic death. Tetrodotoxin slows the heart rate to 1 beat per minute. If he wanted to disappear, he could. Why? Dominic asked. Why come after me? Why come after us? Because, Elara turned to him. I stopped sending him money. They entered the house. The atmosphere was tense. The guards were on high alert. I need to check the financial logs, Elara said, heading straight for Dominic's office. She bypassed the main computer and went to a hidden safe behind a painting. She spun the dial, opened it, and pulled out a heavy ledger. I thought you were a librarian, Dominic said, leaning against the doorframe, watching her work. Now you're a forensic accountant. I manage the library's budget, she murmured distractedly. Numbers are numbers. If Blue Jay Holdings is funding the attacks against you, there has to be a paper trail connecting it to your organization. Someone here is laundering the money for him. She spread the ledger out. Her finger traced the lines of transactions. Dominic watched her, fascinated. She was brilliant, lethal and brilliant. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Found it, she whispered. Dominic pushed off the wall. Who? Elara looked up, her face pale. It's not a who, Dominic. It's a where. Look at these transfers. Small amounts under the radar, all going to a maintenance vendor called K-Tech Security, the company that installed your new perimeter grid last month. I vetted them, Dominic said. My consigliere Marcus vetted them personally. Marcus? Elara froze. Marcus Thorne. No, not Thorne. Dominic shook his head. Marcus Vane, my advisor. He's been with the family for 20 years. Elara's eyes darted around the room. Where is Marcus Vane right now? He's in the guest house, Dominic said. He stays there when we have high alert status. Dominic, Elara stood up slowly. Vane isn't just an advisor. Vane is an anagram, V-A-N-E. She grabbed a pen and wrote it on the notepad. Then she wrote E-V-A-N. Evan, Dominic asked. No. She wrote another name. N-E-V-A. I don't understand. It doesn't matter, Elara said, grabbing a letter opener from the desk. It was sharp, made of silver. The security grid. If K-Tech installed it, and K-Tech is funded by Blue Jay, then we aren't locked inside for protection. We're locked inside a cage. Suddenly the lights in the mansion went out. Pitch black. The electronic locks on the windows clicked open. The sound echoed through the silent house, like gunshots. They're here, Elara whispered. Who? Dominic pulled his gun, the flashlight attachment cutting through the dark. The cleanup crew, Elara said. Acheron, My father. And Marcus Vane. A voice came over the intercom system. It wasn't the guards. It was a smooth, synthetic voice. "Good evening, Mr. Barone. Mrs. Barone, please remain calm. Resistance will result in immediate termination." Dominic grabbed Elara's hand. "To the safe room. Now." "No." Elara pulled back. "The safe room is electronic. They'll turn it into a coffin. They'll suck the oxygen out." "Then what do we do?" Dominic asked. He could hear footsteps on the stairs. Heavy boots. Tactical gear. Elara looked at him, and in the darkness her smile was terrifying. "We go hunting," she said. "You take the east wing. I'll take the west. Meet me in the kitchen in 10 minutes. Kill anything that isn't me." "Elara, you can't." "Go." She shoved him toward the door. Dominic ran. He didn't look back. He heard the sound of glass breaking, then a wet thud, and a man's scream cut short. Elara wasn't running away. She was engaging the enemy. Dominic moved through the shadows of his own home. He encountered the first mercenary in the hallway. The man was wearing night vision goggles. Dominic didn't hesitate. Bang, bang. 2 shots to the chest. The man went down. Dominic moved faster. He had to get to Marcus Vane. The traitor. He kicked open the door to the guest wing. The room was empty. The window was open. "Looking for someone?" A voice sneered from behind him. Dominic spun around. Marcus Vane stood there, holding a silenced pistol. But he wasn't alone. Beside him stood a man who looked like an older, ruined version of Elara. He had the same eyes, but hard and cruel. Thomas Vance, the dead father. "Hello, son-in-law." Thomas smiled. "Sorry about the mess, but I really need that life insurance policy on my daughter to pay out. And you? Well, you're just in the way." Dominic raised his gun, but Marcus fired first. The bullet hit Dominic in the shoulder. He spun around, dropping his weapon, collapsing to the floor. Pain exploded in his arm. Marcus walked over and kicked the gun away. "Nothing personal, Dom. But Blue Jay pays better." Thomas Vance stepped forward, looking down at Dominic. "It's a shame. You seem like a decent man. But Elara, she knows too much. She always was too smart for her own good." Thomas raised his weapon, aiming between Dominic's eyes. "Say goodbye, Dominic." Click. The sound of a hammer striking an empty chamber. Thomas frowned. He pulled the trigger again. Click. "Mag dump," a female voice said from the shadows of the balcony. Thomas and Marcus spun around. Elara stood on the railing of the balcony, backlit by the moonlight. She held a sniper rifle, one she must have taken off a dead mercenary, on the roof. "I unloaded your guns while you were sleeping this afternoon." "Dad," Elara said, her voice shaking slightly, but her aim steady. "I knew you were in the house. I smelled your cologne, Old Spice and cheap whiskey." "Elara," Thomas spread his hands. "Baby girl, listen to me." "You sold me," she said, tears streaming down her face. "You sold me to Dominic for a debt, and then you tried to kill me for an insurance policy." "It's just business," Thomas said. "This Elara pulled the trigger is pleasure." Bang! The round caught Thomas Vance in the chest, sending him flying backward over the banister. He fell 2 stories into the foyer below with a sickening crunch. Marcus Vane stared at Elara, then at his empty gun, then at Dominic, who was struggling to stand up. "I quit," Marcus said, dropping the gun and raising his hands. Dominic, clutching his bleeding shoulder, stood up. His face was pure rage. "Severance package denied," Dominic growled. He didn't shoot until Marcus. He charged him, tackling the traitor through the open window. They both plummeted into the dark, rainy night below. "Dominic!" Elara screamed, dropping the rifle and running to the edge. Gravity is a cruel mistress, but the ground is unforgiving. The fall from the second-story window wasn't cinematic. It was a chaotic, violent tumble through the canopy of the decorative oak tree that lined the west side of the manor. Branches whipped at Dominic's face like angry lashes, tearing at his skin, slowing their descent just enough to prevent instant death, but not enough to stop the pain. They hit the earth with a wet, bone-jarring thud. The impact drove the air from Dominic's lungs in a strangled gasp. For a moment, the world was nothing but a high-pitched ringing in his ears and the taste of copper in his mouth. The rain was falling harder now, turning the manicured lawn into a swamp. He lay there staring up at the dark sky, the rain stinging his eyes, his gunshot wound screaming in agony. His left arm, the one Marcus had shot upstairs, felt like it was on fire. A few feet away, Marcus Vane groaned. He rolled over, coughing up water and mud. Marcus was younger than Dominic, lighter, and crucially he hadn't taken a bullet to the shoulder 5 minutes ago. Dominic tried to push himself up his right hand, clawing into the sodden grass, but his body revolted. He collapsed back down, his vision swimming. "You always were. Too heavy, Dom." Marcus wheezed, stumbling to his feet. He wiped a smear of mud from his eyes, his expensive suit ruined. He looked down at Dominic with a mixture of pity and contempt. Too heavy, too old, too stuck in the old ways. "Traitor." Dominic gritted out the word, bubbling up with blood. "Opportunist," Marcus corrected. He reached into his boot. The moonlight caught the serrated edge of a combat knife. "Blue Jay offered me the keys to the kingdom. All I had to do was open the door." Marcus lunged. Adrenaline, sharp and electric, flooded Dominic's system, overriding the pain. He rolled to the right, just as the knife buried itself in the mud where his throat had been a second before. Dominic didn't try to stand up. He knew he was too slow. Instead, he fought dirty. He kicked out his heavy dress shoe, connecting solidly with Marcus's kneecap. There was a sickening pop. Marcus howled, stumbling back, but he didn't drop the knife. He was fueled by the desperation of a man who knew there was no going back. He slashed downward, the blade catching Dominic's forearm, slicing through the fabric of his tuxedo and biting into the skin. Dominic roared, grabbing a fistful of mud and flinging it into Marcus's eyes. While the traitor was blinded, Dominic scrambled to his knees, tackling him around the waist. They went down into the muck, a tangle of limbs and fury. This wasn't a noble duel. It was a street fight. It was ugly, wet, and desperate. Dominic slammed his forehead into Marcus's nose, a brutal headbutt that cracked cartilage. Marcus screamed but retaliated by jamming his thumb into Dominic's bullet wound. White-hot pain blinded Dominic. His strength faltered. Marcus used the opening to flip them over. He straddled Dominic's chest, pinning him to the ground. He raised the knife high, his face a mask of bloody, broken rage. "She's going to make a beautiful widow," Marcus hissed, spit and rain, dripping onto Dominic's face. "Don't worry, Dom. I'll comfort her. Once she realizes her daddy is dead too, she'll need a shoulder to cry on." Dominic struggled, gripping Marcus's wrist with his good hand, but his strength was fading fast. The blood loss was taking its toll. The knife tip hovered inches from his left eye. He could see the pores on Marcus's face, the dilation of his pupils. "Do it," Dominic growled, refusing to beg. "But know this, Silas will find you, and he will skin you alive. Silas is dead, Marcus sneered, pressing the knife down. Everyone loyal to you is dead. It's a new world, Dominic. The pressure on Dominic's wrist was immense. The knife point touched his skin. He braced himself for the end. Get off my husband. The voice didn't scream. It didn't shout. It cut through the sound of the rain like a razor blade, cold, precise, and devoid of fear. Marcus froze. He looked up toward the patio. Elara was standing at the top of the stone steps. She looked like a spectre. Her emerald green dress was soaked, clinging to her body, the hem stained dark with mud and blood, her father's blood. Her hair hung in wet strands around her face. In her hands she held Dominic's dropped Beretta 9mm. She held it with a two-handed combat grip. Her stance wide, her elbows locked. There was no shaking, no hesitation. Elara! Marcus panted, a twisted smile forming on his lips. Baby, thank God. He's crazy. He attacked me. I'm trying to save you. I saw you push him, Elara said. Her voice was flat. I heard you in the library. You sold us out for a seat at the table. No, you don't understand, Marcus pleaded slowly, easing the pressure off the knife, but keeping it near Dominic's throat. Your father, Thomas, he had a plan. We were going to run the city together. You, me, and him. We can still do it. Just put the gun down. Elara tilted her head slightly as if listening to a distant song. My father is dead, Marcus. I put a bullet through his heart in the foyer. Do you think I have any hesitation about doing the same to you? Marcus's eyes widened. The realization hit him. The mouse had killed the cat. Elara, wait. Marcus started to rise, lifting his hands. You broke the first rule of this house, Elara whispered, her finger tightening on the trigger. You threatened what is mine. Bang! The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed garden. The bullet struck Marcus Vane squarely in the center of his forehead. His head snapped back violently, and his body went limp, collapsing sideways off Dominic's chest into the mud. Silence returned to the garden, broken only by the relentless rain. Dominic lay there for a moment, staring at the dead man next to him. He took a ragged breath, then another. He pushed himself up to a sitting position, his body screaming in protest. Elara lowered the gun. She didn't drop it. She engaged the safety with a practiced click, walked down the stairs, and stepped into the mud. She didn't care about her designer heels sinking into the earth. She knelt beside Dominic. Her hands cold from the rain, but gentle, cupped his face. Her eyes scanned him frantically, checking his pupils, his throat, his shoulder. Dominic, she breathed, her voice finally cracking, revealing the terrified wife beneath the assassin's exterior. Look at me. Stay with me. I'm here, Dominic rasped. He reached up his bloody hand covering hers. You killed him. I took out the trash, she said, her voice hardening again as she glanced at Marcus's body. Dominic looked past her toward the open front door of the mansion. He couldn't see the foyer from here, but he knew what was inside. Thomas Vance, her father. Elara, Dominic said softly. Your father. Are you okay? She froze. For a second, he saw the grief shatter her composure. Her lip trembled. But then she inhaled deeply, locking the pain away in a mental vault. He made his choice when he sold me, she said. He wasn't my father tonight. He was an enemy combatant. She helped Dominic stand. He leaned heavily on her, his arm draped over her shoulders. She was small, but she was surprisingly strong. A pillar of steel wrapped in silk. The police, Dominic groaned as they limped toward the patio. "The gunshots. The neighbors will have called." "Let them come," Elara said, her mind already racing 3 steps ahead. "The story is simple. A home invasion. A kidnapping attempt by a rogue contractor named Acheron. Marcus Vane died heroically trying to defend us. My father, he was a victim of the crossfire." Dominic looked at her in awe. She was rewriting history while walking through a crime scene. "You're terrifying," Dominic whispered, a mix of fear and intense affection in his voice. Elara looked up at him, raindrops clinging to her eyelashes. A small, dark smile touched her lips. "I'm a baronne," she said. As they reached the shelter of the porch, the distant wail of sirens began to pierce the night. The flashing blue and red lights reflected off the wet driveway. The world was coming to investigate. But they wouldn't find a helpless librarian and a mob boss. They would find a king and his queen standing over the ruins of their enemies, unbreakable. 3 months later. The reconstruction of the Blackwood estate had cost millions, but in the world of Dominic Barone, money was the easiest thing to replace. The bullet holes in the library had been patched and painted over with a custom eggshell finish. The Persian rug in the Great Hall once soaked in the blood of the DeLuca family, and the tears of a maid had been burned and replaced with white marble from a quarry in Tuscany. Dominic stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in the master suite, adjusting his silk tie. He looked the same broad-shouldered, imposing his dark hair slicked back with military precision. But beneath the bespoke Brioni suit, his body was a road map of the night the world changed. The scar on his shoulder was a jagged, angry knot of tissue. The one on his forearm, a thin silver line. "The wind is picking up," a voice said from the balcony door. Dominic turned. Elara was standing there, silhouetted by the late afternoon sun. She was no longer the girl who hid in oversized cardigans. She wore a tailored black power suit with a plunging neckline and a pair of Louboutin heels that clicked with lethal intent against the hardwood floor. Her hair was pulled back into a polished, severe bun, highlighting the sharp, aristocratic lines of her face. "The wind always picks up before a storm," Dominic replied, walking toward her. He reached out his hand, resting on her waist. "Are you ready for tonight?" Tonight was the Unity Gala, a high-stakes dinner at the Gilded Cage. It wasn't just a party, it was a coronation. The heads of the 5 families would be there, waiting to see if the Barone Empire had weakened after the unfortunate home invasion that had claimed the lives of Dominic's consigliere and his father-in-law. "I'm ready to see their faces," Elara said, her voice cool and steady. She reached up, straightening his tie, with fingers that had once pulled a trigger without flinching. "They think you're vulnerable, Dominic. They think I'm a distraction." "They have no idea," Dominic murmured, kissing her forehead. The limousine ride into Manhattan was silent, but it wasn't the heavy, awkward silence of their early marriage. It was the silence of 2 predators who had practiced their hunt. When the car pulled up to the cigar lounge, a swarm of paparazzi and associates crowded the sidewalk. Dominic stepped out first, offering his hand to Elara. As she emerged, the flashbulbs went wild. The tabloids called her the mob muse, but the men in the shadows knew better. Inside, the air was thick with expensive tobacco and the scent of old money. Giovanni DeLuca sat at the center table, flanked by his lieutenants. His daughter Vanessa sat beside him. Vanessa looked different. The swelling in her face had subsided, but her nose had a slight, permanent crook that even the best plastic surgeons in the city couldn't fully erase. When Elara walked into the room, Vanessa's glass rattled against the table. She didn't look at Dominic with her usual provocative smirk. She looked at Alara with a raw, primal fear. "Dominic." Giovanni stood his voice gravelly. He looked tired. The death of his daughter's pride had aged him. "And the lovely Alara. Please sit." The dinner was a masterclass in subtext. For 2 hours, the men discussed territory shipping routes through the port of Newark and the rising heat from the FBI. Dominic led the conversation, but every time a difficult decision arose, his eyes flickered toward Alara. She would offer a short, precise observation, a detail about a contract or a loophole in a zoning law that would effectively end the debate. She wasn't just a guest. She was the architect. "I heard about your father, Alara." Giovanni said, his eyes narrowing as the dessert course was served. "A tragedy, to lose a man of his caliber in a random robbery." The table went dead quiet. It was a test, a jab to see if she would break. Alara set her spoon down with a soft clink. She leaned forward, the candlelight dancing in her dark eyes. "My father was a man who lived by the sword, Giovanni. He understood better than anyone that when you play a high-stakes game, the house eventually wins. I've decided to take over his consulting firm. I believe you had some outstanding contracts with him." Giovanni blinked, taken aback. Yes, we were discussing some security upgrades." "Good," Alara said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "My rates have doubled, but the results I guarantee they'll be permanent." Vanessa swallowed hard, looking down at her plate. She knew exactly what permanent meant in Alara's vocabulary. As the gala wound down, Dominic and Alara stood on the sidewalk waiting for their car. The city lights blurred around them. "You handled him well," Dominic said, lighting a cigar. "He's an old dog, Dominic. He just needs to know who holds the leash," she replied. She looked at the passing cars, her expression thoughtful. "I'm going to open that new library wing next month, in my father's name. A legacy of education." Dominic chuckled a dark, low sound. "You're a piece of work, Alara Vance." "Alara Barone," she corrected him, stepping closer so their shoulders touched. Dominic realized then that the woman he had married to settle a debt had become his greatest asset. He was the king of New York, feared by every thug from Brooklyn to the Bronx. But as he looked at Alara, the woman who had killed her own blood to protect his throne, he knew the truth. He ruled the streets, but Alara ruled him, and as long as she was by his side, the Barone Empire would never fall. "Let's go home, Alara," he said. "Yes," she whispered, her hand slipping into his. "Let's go home." And that is the incredible finale of The Lady of the Manor. What a journey, from a quiet librarian to the most feared woman in the New York underworld. Alara Vance proved that you should never mistake silence for weakness. I want to know your thoughts. Did Alara do the right thing by taking out her father? Or did she lose a piece of her soul that night? And what do you think the future holds for the Barone Empire? Let me know your theories in the comments below. If you loved this drama and want more gritty, high-stakes storytelling, make sure to hit that like button. It helps the channel grow more than you know. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you're the first to know when our next story drops. We've got a massive new series coming out next week that you won't want to miss. Thanks for watching, and stay sharp out there.